The Bitcoin Group, the American original. For over the last 10 seconds, the sharpest Satoshis, the best Bitcoins, the hardest cryptocurrency talk. We'd like to welcome our panelists, Ben Ark from BTC IoT.
Shemai Nastan, hello.
And I'm Thomas Hunt from the World Crypto Network. Moving on to issue 1. Federal Reserve says inflation should rise dramatically. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell finally had their meeting on Thursday, virtually gathering in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, unable to enjoy any golf this year because the conference is being conducted virtually because of the coronavirus. The Federal Reserve is hoping to boost inflation.
There is an infinite amount of cash at the Federal Reserve
and is going to print more money. They hope that higher inflation will boost wage growth, which has been anemic for over a decade. You could just try having laws on wages. Let's go to Ben Ark. Will the Federal Reserve be successful? Will they raise inflation? And as all the Bitcoiners are hoping, will the rise in inflation make people realize that you can just print endless amounts of dollars while there are only 21 million Bitcoin?
Yes, but I think it's really a question of what tools do they have to use at this point in the economic crisis which we're in. And they have a focus on trying to create a strong labor force. And in order to have a strong labor force, you've got to have higher wages. In order to have high wages, you have to have a labor force who demands high wages because their real world earnings and what they can actually afford to buy is decreasing. So that's why they're hoping for inflation to go up. But it's just what can they do? There's two directions they can go in, really, and they don't want negative interest rates. They don't want to have a similar circumstance to somewhere like Japan. And with America, I think America's accepted that it really can't compete in the world stage when it comes to exports. So why try and keep its a competitive advantage by keeping wages low? So the two directions it can go in is, something like UBI, where you don't have many people in work and you just give them money, which there's lots of good arguments for. Or, I'm just saying there's two directions it can go in that,
there's a lot of good arguments.
There's lots of directions they can go in, but when you're trying to,
you can't do that in America unless you're FDR. You can't do any kind of programs.
Well, when you're trying to stimulate centrally fiscal stimulus, or you're trying to steer the economy, which arguably they should or shouldn't do, but they are doing because that's the position they're in. There are two ways in which they can go. They can go the kind of UBI route, or they can go the route where they try and increase labor force and create more jobs, and then letting inflation do what it does. It's not a case of they'll actively encourage inflation. They're just going to not stop inflation from happening and cap it at 2%, which, the Keynesians would say would increase aggregate demand, and then you would have more money flowing through the system, and then you would have more jobs, and although prices of products would probably increase, but there are also a whole bunch of obviously, of course, some obvious negative effects, such as if you've got a mortgage, then suddenly which you can't really afford, then when it comes to renegotiate your mortgage, you'll be in a position which you really can't afford and you'll default, and then you'll have some sort of housing crisis. But I think one of the most interesting parts of announcing something like this is that companies will assume that their products will cost more in the future, so they'll increase production so they can profit more from when price of products goes up. So you end up with lots of companies ramping up production now while labor's cheap, and also trying to secure funding now for investment because interest rates are low, in speculation that obviously they'll get higher, and that gives the economy like a massive, like a defibrillating the economy, which is kind of what they want because they've got huge unemployment, and a lot of negative side effects to the coronavirus, which is only going to increase. It's really a question of what can they do. We're in as bad a financial crisis as what we had in the US is, and most of the world's in as bad a financial crisis as what we had in the Great Depression. And it's just a case of what can they do to try and keep the whole thing moving, and not have things like food shortages and defribbing the economy and trying to keep people in work. There's something they can do now. I mean, it may all just be, propaganda to encourage companies to do that, just to start producing more and to start employing more people to make stuff and taking investment now while interest rates are low, because they know they won't be able to invest so easily when it costs more to get loans and so forth. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of a clutching at straws thing, like we all know what's coming, and that's large-scale economic crisis, and we've talked about it for years. Most people have talked about it for years, and we've been expecting it. But with this coronavirus, it's suddenly on our doorstep, and it's going to get gnarly, man. But I mean, they're just trying to buffer it as best they can. But probably they're kicking the can down the road. And when you have kind of a higher inflation, trying to stimulate economy and cause boom, then the bust which you will get after the boom, which could be very short, is going to be that much deeper. So kicking the can down the road, very sadly.
I agree with Ben here. It's the only tool they have. There's nothing else they can do. This is what they have to do. And I think what's important to look at here is that this is the most the Federal Reserve can do to fight the coronavirus. They don't have any other powers. They only have the power of money printing or the power of not money printing, really generally. And they've chosen the power of money printing.
There is an infinite amount of cash at the Federal Reserve.
But I don't think that the amount's quite infinite. I see a lot of Bitcoiners, whenever they hear the word inflation, whenever even 2% is mentioned, they think that it's Weimar Republic, hyperinflation, money is raining from the sky, get a wheelbarrow, catch some, you can wallpaper your room, who cares? It's just paper money. It's not quite that bad. Certainly, they've still overprinted. There's still lots more money. The reserve requirement for banks are gone, removed during the coronavirus crisis, although there were very little to begin with. I think it's going to have its effect. I think they'll get the 2% inflation. I don't think we're going to see major world collapsing events for this. I don't think it's the beginning of the end, and we should all henny penny on Twitter. But that's what Twitter seems to say. And the price of Bitcoin went up 2.5% today. I haven't checked it in the last 10 minutes, but yeah, I think that's about it. We're going to see a short-term news bump. It'll go away. There'll be a second story 6 months down the line when they'll give this the result. They'll say, hey, it worked. They increased inflation. Maybe they over-increased it, but I don't think we're going 20, 30%. I don't think we're going hyperinflation here. And I don't think that they're going to underinflate. I think they'll hit their, they'll pump it up. They'll print some more money.
It's not so much that they're trying to actively cause a higher rate of inflation. They're just not going to prevent a higher rate of inflation. So they're just going to let it do what it does. So, with a lower rate of inflation, arguably you get, more competitiveness, low wages, less jobs, leaner companies who can easily borrow. But then the borrowing power of a big company is so much more that with low rates of inflation, you tend to have a lot of money gravitating upward, and then small businesses kind of suffer. Whereas with a higher rate of inflation, I think you end up with smaller businesses actually can benefit from that. So it's interesting they talk about a stronger labor force after decades of crushing unions and the rest of it. But I think that people are starting to come to the terms with the fact that you actually need to produce shit in order for economy to be worthwhile.
But also, this concept we shouldn't be looking to the central bank to help us with our union problems. We shouldn't look for the central bank to help us with job problems. And the problem that I think Robert Reich was referring to on Twitter that actually got a lot of retweets, even on my account, just kind of showed how, I think, to sum it up quickly, in the 50s, I think that the CEO to worker rate was around 20 to 1. So you'd make a lot more money if you're CEO, but wasn't crazy. I'm pretty sure the rate now is 320 to 1. So the inequality has grown, and the Federal Reserve affecting interest rates. Sure, it's one of the only levers they have, but it's not going to affect that inequality. If we want to affect that inequality, we're going to have to probably go back to horror of horrors, Denmark-like tax rates of the 1950s, where the wealthy were taxed at 80 or 90%. I know it's horrifying, but I just read this fantastic article by this anthropologist, and he really summed up the whole thing, and he had the entire structure up and down, and he basically explained when the wealthy are taxed a lot, it creates less inequality, then there's less rioting. When the wealthy are taxed a little, it creates more inequality and more rioting. So it's basically a structure of a slider of how much rioting do you like. And as of recently, the kleptocracy, or whatever it is, the kleptocracy has gotten really good, and they're taking a lot more than ever before. And the rake is great, right? They're just raking it in. But this is leading to massive inequality and rioting in the streets. So maybe
have you ever been to Denmark?
No, I imagine it's not.
I spent a lot of time in Denmark, and it is noticeable the lack of class. So you'll have on the same street. I mean, crikey, for better or for worse. I'm not arguing that, you know, the apparatus of tax control to kind of keep rich poor and poor richer is good or bad. I'm just saying that
clearly we're influencing the system here. Like, one of the main things here.
From my own experience of being in Denmark, you'll have, you know, a cleaner, and they'll live a few doors down from a doctor, and you end up with a very, I mean, so you'll just go sit on a train in Denmark, and you'll notice everyone talks to each other. Like, there's no snootiness, you know, like the crazy trampy guy will sit down next to the swanky, you know, yuppie business guy, and they'll just start chatting away. Like, there's this really the lack of class divide. So I mean, and that is from, but that's decade. I mean, they've had that as a policy for
still we have to have something to. We have to have goals. We have to have something to aspire to. And it's funny because the article said the exact same thing. It described how you wouldn't be rude to a checkout person in Denmark because that checkout person has the same health care as you, has the same social safety net, and probably lives in your neighborhood. Their kid goes to your school. They're probably friends. Whereas if you're going to a checkout here at like Whole Foods or something, there's a huge divide between the checkout staff and the people who have the money to shop there. And if you have the money to shop at a place like Whole Foods, or not to pick on them, but organic food is better and is more expensive. But if you have money to shop at a nicer place, you probably put your kids in a private school. You might have driven in from out of town. You might live in the suburbs. You might be heading by the market on your way home from the downtown office, at least in the pre-COVID days. So.
I suppose philosophically the question becomes, which is synthetic? Is it synthetic that there is a huge sort of wealth divide and inequality, or is it synthetic that there is less of a wealth divide between people? I mean, in the case of the Danes, I suppose there's a lot of taxes and things in place.
It certainly seems like we're too rich. All these,
however,
we're meddling.
Yeah. However,
meddling in the system.
Yeah, but the US is just the opposite. So it's not a case of the US is freer. It's actually geared to make those rich people much richer, and then the poor people much poorer, and then you end up with a widening gap. So in both circumstances, I suppose there's meddling. And maybe, you know, the argument is from the Fed is they're going to try and meddle less, and then see if maybe they can go somewhere in the middle. I don't know.
I don't know. They're not really engineering it at quite a large scale, but I do think that philosophically we can discuss over hundreds of years here the failed U.S. experiment, and that the failed United States experiment, it starts out with this compromise, the 3/5 compromise on slavery, that African American slaves will be counted as 3/5 of a person for the points of representation. This becomes a big deal in the South. They need this population is pushing up their numbers, getting them representation. So if you took that away, they would lose representation. Even worse, if you give those people rights, you're creating a class to vote against the people in power. So that comes to a head in the Civil War. In the Civil War, we replaced the system of enforced labor, forced slavery, with wage slavery. Wage slavery is a superior system of slavery. You have a factory, and the workers are now interchangeable cogs. If a worker loses a hand, you just get a new worker. Whereas in the South, with the owned slavery, which is certainly immoral and inhuman and all of those things, but it's also a failure economically. Economically, it's not as good. If you set up a factory in the South, given slavery, if your slave loses a hand, you've just lost thousands of dollars in that person because unfortunately you own them. They are part of the factory, etc. So the wage slavery system, allowing for interchangeable cogs of human beings, allowed to bring these numbers down. Then we had this system where the capitalists went all over the world looking for lower and lower labor. They kept gutting out the inside of the US, and now there's nothing left. So we'll have to decide. I mean, certainly there's meddling, certainly, but it's
they got a meddle, man. I mean, this is exactly why the euro exists. So before the euro, the Germans have always been the factory of Europe. They've always produced all the things, but it got to the point where what was it called? Oh, the Deutschmark was going to rival the US dollar for its purchasing power, which would mean that the cost of wages would be so high in Germany that yes, they're really good at making stuff, but you wouldn't be able to afford to get anyone to make anything because the wages would be too high. So that's why they really kind of pushed the idea of the euro to kind of stop the currency competitions from happening, where they would be outcompeted in the world marketplace for labor. So it's all hacky meddling, man, and like I don't know.
Well,
we're screwed either way.
Well, we've got to look at the results, and we got to say, was it a successful experiment? In a lot of ways,
I mean, the MMT is.
The U.S. has been at war almost all the time. That was also mentioned in the article. We should probably bring this article up at some point, but there's a Rolling Stone article. I tweeted it several times, but it was fantastic. And one of the things that they said about the U.S. and Germany, I lost it. Go ahead, Ben. They were talking about the economy.
You lost what they were saying. The economy. I mean, so
too much, man.
I'm very much. I mean, there's some great statistics on. I mean, crikey, Europe is a powder keg. And our ability to go to war on ourselves with hard borders and nationalism is profoundly dangerous, as we had in quick succession with 2 world wars. The fairly quick establishment of the euro after that. There's some great statistics on countries not going to war when they share a currency.
Yeah,
or they share a medium of exchange.
Like all but 14 of its years. So the U.S. is the most warlike country.
Yes, but that's because you've got the world reserve currency.
So I think this domestic piece is the product of all of the currency manipulation and all of the societal manipulation. So the question is, what is the value of this domestic piece? And in a lot of ways, this comes back to something that I learned when I was visiting Germany. And I was talking to a friend of mine there, and he explained to me how modern art worked. Because I looked at modern art and I was like, that is some silly stuff, right? You are fooling rich people into buying that. You are making nonsense. And I didn't want to insult my friend, but he was in like a modern art dance troupe, and they had done modern art dance performances at a very high level, which is just as good as doing them at a low level because it's random stuff. He said they did kicks on stage while someone shot tennis balls at them. I mean, it's stuff like that, and the lights are flashing, but it represented Jesus and the guy's lifestyle and him growing up. And it was very textural, like it's a very complex art piece. But still, that art piece was a product of this piece. What the artist said when my friend asked him and we talked to him about it, he said that because of this great piece that I've had, I've been able to make this meaningless art. And in normal times, you have to make at least aesthetically pleasing art, right? If you want to sell a portrait of a count or whatever, you paint him traditional style. You don't paint him like Picasso with 2 eyes on one side. Count's not going to buy it, right? You don't go all Moreau. You don't blast at him, right? You can't create that kind of art under that kind of system. But the system that we had has allowed for this art. And let's go bigger. Let's say David Bowie, Bob Dylan, all the commercial, all the movies, all the television shows, The Sopranos, everything that so-called Western civilization, Western culture, whatever you want to call it, has created is a product of this piece, is a product of this manipulation, this meddling, the Federal Reserve, the currency, the American system, the two wars, the Marshall Project, rebuilding Europe, rebuilding Japan, all of this, like, has it been a success? I mean, I think it didn't last forever, right? That's certainly one point that is very clear when you're in the decline of a thing and that everything's getting tighter, right? And you're worried. So certainly for us in the vice, it's not so great right now. But it made a really nice culture. It made a general relative peace, depending on your economic level. If you were forced to be drafted, if you chose to fight a war, if you chose to travel to an unsafe location, if bad things happened, whatever. But generally, you could have been safe. You could have lived your life. You could have made some art. You could have had some kids, whatever you wanted to do. The American system, about 200 years of that. Now, again, not so great for minorities until recently, and even then not so great. So that's another negative strike on the system, but not necessarily because of the economic creation, although I do think, and again, everyone's going to be shocked because they're so conservative, but there is a shockingly strong argument for reparations. Freak out, light fires. But no, the fact that they stole the economic wealth of these people at a certain point, then they made the bad deal with the 100 acres and the mule. They didn't give them the mule, 40 acres and a mule.
Well, I mean, you're sounding like a Keynesian. So, I mean, Keynes was all about you. There's no point having a debtor who can't pay the debt. So when it comes to reparations, like, you know,
I just think that
you're talking about different type of reparation. You're talking about
the reparations, a lot of generational value that other people were able to because of strategic structural decisions like the GI Bill, like the red line.
The meddling. So Keynes, Keynes believed that by now we would be a leisure society, that we would work a couple of days a week, and then people after working a couple of days a week would have enough money to sustain themselves. Because if you looked at the trajectory of just production, that kind of made sense, you know, like that would be possible. From where he was standing, of course he was wrong, because, you know, what happens is you have a smaller workforce who work harder. But I think the main point is that all of this stuff's grey. Like, nothing's good, nothing's bad, nothing's binary. Having a sovereign currency, like if you look at the modern monetary theorists, having a sovereign currency which you control and you can print yourself has tremendous economic advantage, because you can't go broke. You can always just print more shit if you want to, which you can't do if you're in a monetary union like the euro, for example. However, for Europe's sake, having a monetary union means you don't have like war, you know, currency war, and then followed shortly after by a real world war. So you can't. There's no argument. You know, you can't say one is good, one is bad. It's just a series of trade-offs and trying to find the best solution at the time, I suppose. But I think
argue that
I think bringing it back to Bitcoin, which I think that's always very important. Before, people didn't have that choice. You know, we were very much in the hands of the government. You know, whatever they want to, however, whichever direction they want to meddle, you're you know, at their whim. Whereas now we can very easily opt out, and there's easy on-ramps for opting out and choosing other ways to transact and other ways to store value. And I think that competitive edge will, in fact, be good for sovereign currencies, because I'll have to compete with, you know, a non-proprietary version of their controlled proprietary currency. So just trying to bring it back to Bitcoin then, because I'm sure we could rant on for hours about this.
I know, but I've got more. I do think the future is going to be a hybrid. Right now, I'm expanding my definitions. I used to be going more 100% Bitcoin, but I do think you're right. They're going to put some kind of a currency or something on top of there so that they do have the ability to inflate it in an emergency, to print more money, either a crisis like coronavirus or a hurricane or an economic collapse or a world war or space aliens or whatever, they're going to put some borrowing debt utility vehicle thing that they're going to park on top of Bitcoin and make their own version. Certainly it'll never inflate the 21 million, but it might become popular enough to the point where it has its own economy and its own forces and things. But going back to Keynes,
Well, that's
our 2-day work,
John, yeah.
I want my 2-day work week. And I think we were there. I think we could have had it, but I think that we would have had to suffer under what Henry Ford said. You can have a car in any color you want, so long as it's black. At the time, they were making products and they were selling them based on their quality. These shoes will last longer. This tires are more durable. Then they said, hey, the tires are hot pink. You could get hot pink tires on your car. You could get a car in any color you want. You can get new clothes every 3 months. You can have this fast fashion, all these consumerism. And Bernays, especially watch Adam Curtis's fantastic film, The Century of the Self. But I think that they might have derailed our 2-day work.
He was Freud's nephew, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was Freud's nephew. He wrote the book Propaganda. He was a major creator of things like advertising and focus groups and shaping people. And he merged and flexed with the time. And he was able to continue his power and his control and testing his ideas. And a lot of these ideas are like push polling. If you test them, they have some effect anyway. So just the act of testing them creates a result and creates an effect. So it's interesting to see. But
I think psychologically, though, market manipulation, such as like brand shit and whatever else, I think people are tired of it, man. Like I got the new Pinebook for my mum. One of the great things about the laptop, sorry. And one of the great things about the new Pinebook laptop,
tell people what the Pinebook is, though, or I will.
So Pinebook is like a fully free and open source, like hardware, software laptop. It's rad, and actually the price point's pretty sweet too, man. I think it was like 200 quid or something. And it's a functional little.
Went there is they make them in batches, so you can't just buy a Pinebook. You have to kind of invest, and then when you're
to wait a little while,
they're going to make like 200 at a time or whatever. It has to wait. And I thought that was
it
was very cool, but it's very co-op kind of hippie for a person.
It's very cooperative.
It's not going to work, but
actually though, that was quite cool. Like when we got the box for it, you open it up and there's just like a crappy printed out A4 piece of paper saying thanks for buying this Pinebook. But then the Pinebook itself, there was no branding on it. There was no logo. It was just, you opened it up. It was just a functional laptop running Manjaro, like Linux, which is a great distro. It's one of my favorite distros, and it was refreshing. It was like I'm not being sold to through brand awareness. Like this is just a functional thing. I don't know, maybe it's the lefty inside of me or something, but I liked it. My mum liked it too. But you going back to another point. So with the Keynesian stuff, since we were able to farm and have surplus time where people could build things like Stonehenge, contemplate our place in the universe, develop society through engineering, like you'd have people who could sit around and come with ideas of making a better plow and whatever else, and a better loom, and etc. etc.
You can make amazing things as soon as you're not being killed all the time. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, yeah, and also that you've got the time to, you're not just starving or on the brink of starvation and having to work every hour God sends. So this is why the Greeks, relying upon their slave population, because they didn't work, the slaves did all the work, they were so pivotal in world history, and they're able to come up with so much stuff. And I do think that the concept of a leisure society through something like UBI, whatever, it is possible. Of course it's possible. Like we can, as technology advances, we can produce enough stuff to keep everyone fed, and you have this amazing like fabricating 3D printing thing in your house where you can build whatever you want and print potatoes out of soil and water. I don't know. Like, so the nature of production will change. In the short term though, like there's so much, it's a bit like a really crappy legacy banking app which keeps breaking. And you're like, how come this thing hasn't advanced yet, and we aren't in the actual, you know, period in history which we should be in, considering the amount of technology which is out there. And a lot of this banking stuff is like that. It's almost like, why, you know, why aren't we in a better place? And it's just hang-ups, you know. It's all these institutions and apparatus which have existed for centuries, and having them adapt and change is hard, but they're going to be urged and pushed forward by Bitcoin, you know, by these opt-out mechanisms. And that's the John Nash ideal money scenario. The ideal money being not Bitcoin, but in fact the fiat, which has to compete with the Bitcoin. So so it's all part of a process towards greater liberty and greater money and everyone being happier. But expect depression and recession. It's going to happen. Of course, it's going to happen. War, food shortages. No,
like it says on the Georgia Guidestones, there's too many people and not enough trees.
There's enough for everybody, but not enough for what everyone wants. With Gandhi.
I don't want the world. I just want your half. But it's interesting about that computer. It didn't have branding, and they just put a piece of paper in. That could become a marketing choice. Everything in marketing, like Bill Hicks said, it's always seditious, it's always evil. And there's someone out there that's taking notes, and he's like, oh, the customer enjoyed the lo-fi logo-less piece of paper. Try including Polaroid of the guy who shipped it or something next time. And it's like, make it more lo-fi. And when I got my computer, it wasn't even wrapped in little holders. It was just brown paper wrapping. You know, I thought that was really lo-fi, and I was very impressed by the lo-fi. But yeah, they'll get you with the marketing stuff, like Bill Hicks said. But I always refer to Player Piano, and it's this old Vonnegut book, and it's his very first book, and I don't even think it's his most artfully written or easiest to read or anything like that. It's actually the most engineering kind of feeling book that he wrote, because he was working for his brother and for this big companies. I forget, it was like AT&T or one of the big industrial type companies at the time. And he could see the whole future. He could see everything getting plugged in. He could see television. He could see all the different things they were working on. And his idea is that they would pay people to stay home and watch television so that they wouldn't go out and smash the machines. Because you'd have these mobs of Luddites, and the only way you could satisfy the Ludds was to pay them to stay home and watch TV. And I think we're right there. We're right on the precipice of it, but it's going to be VR. And it's the kind of thing where it's very dystopian. You would have to probably keep your VR goggles on for 8 hours a day, something like that. Like your unemployment benefits would be linked to your VR usage, so that you're in VR more, so that you're not breaking things in the real world, and maybe even not enjoying the real world. If you want to go to the Philip K. Dick book, where they trick everyone to work underground in factories while the rich rule in giant parks. The other interesting thing,
I don't know, man. I think we do tend towards greater liberty. I would just say that humans just get wiser. So, you know, the branding tricks and market manipulations which companies could enjoy before, like, people don't care anymore. You know, like most people, like my son, for example, years ago, he wanted an iPhone. Now he doesn't care. He just wants an Android cheap phone off, you know, any brand, you know, whatever, as long as it does this. It's this rectangle which has apps on, whatever. So this idea of like brand awareness, I think people they're kind of sickened by it. They don't care, and it's been a subject of abuse. It's almost like the piracy thing, where you're abused for so long, you overpay for a product like a DVD or a film for so long, or a VHS, that by the time that you say you're able just to download videos, there's no like emotional guilt for ripping off a video off the internet, because you're like, fuck that, I paid 20 quid a DVD for years, I'm getting that for free now, you know. And it has had no negative impact on the industry. So I think I do think that a lot of the commercial consumer mechanisms which could be employed using, you know, we've been programmed against it now, and it doesn't phase us, and it goes over our heads, and we're getting better at just, you know, we can produce enough good stuff that it doesn't have to be branded in that way. So I really like the Pinebook. Honestly, people out there, it's a great product. You could probably get a cheaper like notebooky type laptop, but the very fact that it's free and open source, and The producers are getting much of the money there, and it's just stable. Like, it's a stable, nice product. I was thinking about getting one for myself. So yeah, great machine. Support Pinebook. They produce other stuff as well, such as free and open source smartwatches, which is pretty cool. It's a program.
That's another thing where, yeah, right now you want the Apple Watch because it's the best, but eventually, like you're saying, the free and open source, the Android type of Apple Watch will probably take over. But like Bill Hicks said, it's you're talking about that anti-marketing dollar. That's a very big dollar, a lot of money there, a lot of people into the anti-marketing. And then later on, you get into the righteous indignation dollar. Ooh, that's a big dollar. Ooh, that is a lot of money there. So yeah, that's a great old Bill Hicks bit. I also wanted to mention there's a great we'll play it after the show. It's so good. There's a great Amazon show out right now called Upload. It's not the best show, but it talks about a digital afterlife, and it's such a rich idea that just thinking about it gives you more ideas. And one of the neat things in there is that they talked about printed food. And there's kind of a really wealthy family, I think very much modeled after the Trumps. They snipe and stab after each other. One of the characters even says, "Why are you so mean to each other? You're a family, you know?" And they're like, "Oh, we don't get it. We're always mean." But they make fun of her because she's not used to non-printed food. There's a bone in her chicken, and she's completely foreign to this idea. So it's very, very quick how something can be, fun. We can print potatoes at home. And then the next day, it's like no one remembers what a real potato tastes like, and no one can afford them. So it's interesting to see the sci-fi shift happen there.
That's a great show, man. I mean, it's such a cute little series. It's like 7 episodes or something, 8 episodes.
It's got a little,
but it's almost like someone took a Black Mirror and they just strung it out and made it. It's so lighthearted as well. I really enjoyed watching that. It's great. It's a good show. It's a good show.
I watched it twice, and yeah, it's on the Amazon Prime. Also on the movie,
have another go at it.
I think the movies have kind of hurt themselves with the non-standard pricing. There's something great about a movie theater. It's always, I'm going to age myself, but it's always, let's go high. It's always $15. It's not $8 for a movie. That's so cheap. But yeah, it's $15 no matter what the movie is. I don't really like the way they've done it with the online, where all the movies have different prices, and then the new movie has a certain price, and then it goes on sale. They've created a false choice there. Whereas I know Amazon pushed this early with the books, and there was a big monopoly lawsuit and all that, but just pricing the books at $10 or pricing the books at $15, just no matter what the book is, seems like it makes it more of a product, makes it easier to buy and sell. But I think we're way off course here. Let's get back to the show.
Well, I mean, no, because we can bring it back, because you can say, so monopoly exists unless you strong arm the monopoly into behaving itself through an alternative. And in the movie experience, it was just being able to get it for free off the internet, your Napster or your Pirate Bay or your Streamy or whatever you use. And that's strong arms. That's why you can now enjoy a cheap cinema ticket. And similarly, when it comes to something like software, you have your proprietary, and then you have your free and open source, which then forces proprietary software to behave itself a little bit more and actually take on some of the attributes of, Microsoft now. I think it's the biggest free and open source contributor. So it's it has to take on some of the attributes of the thing which is strong arming it into behaving. And actually, if you want direct action and you want a better world, you should pirate. You should use a free and open source alternative. You should vote with your feet, take your money out of fiat and put it into Bitcoin, because that will force the fiat then to behave itself in a way where people will be happy to keep their money in fiat. So by opting out, you are in fact morally, even if you're just pirating stuff for free, you are in fact strong arming the proprietary monopoly into behaving itself. So I think there's a moral argument to pirating. I think, if I can watch something, everyone's got a Netflix account, everyone. But I'll just watch it on Pirate Bay, just out of pure spite. For that reason,
they've destroyed themselves with the streaming services. There are so many streaming services. My favorite streaming service is this website called justwatch.com. It's actually a meta search engine that searches all the streaming sources. So you can find out if the movie's on Amazon or if the movie's on Hulu or IMDb TV or HBO Max or Netflix or I'm sure I'm leaving one out. Disney Plus, ESPN. I don't know. There's so many more. But yes, they've overdone it. And when you really go back to it, like you're saying, the Pirate Bay has everything. Wow, they have things from Disney and HBO. It's amazing. It's like a superior service, like Netflix used to be when the studios were working together. But it's so funny, these human things. The studios come together, work on Netflix. There's too much money in the pie. And they're like, no, take back the Marvel movies, take back the Friends, like separate everything. They, hurt Netflix. Netflix becomes yet another movie studio, basically making its own movies. And then now we're back to separate. And later on, someone will come along with a new idea. They'll be like, all the streaming services together. And it'll be seen as a new idea, but really it's a return to where we used to be.
It's a bit like Bitcoin podcasts. There's throw a rock, you hit a Bitcoin podcast.
Didn't used to be like that anymore. But I think we have to move on to the exit question.
Yeah.
There's been inflation news. We have the magical Bitcoin predictor ball. It's time to face off against it, Ben. The price of Bitcoin this time next week, higher or lower?
Higher, baby. Higher.
I'll go with higher too. I always go with higher, but we have to ask the ball, will the price of Bitcoin be higher next week? Of course, we shake the ball. It says on Wikipedia you're not supposed to shake Magic 8 balls. It causes bubbles. But it is precision. It makes the magic happen.
Where does the air come from? Where does the air come from? The shaking? I don't understand the science behind it. How hard are you shaking that bubble? You're splitting the hydrogen and the oxygen.
The vacuum. But since you never have to fill the water, interesting side note about you never have to fill the water in here. My friend just got this incredible new thing. I'd never seen it before, but it's a water-cooled CPU, and it has a radiator and has two big fat cords that go to it and from it that send the water in and out of this cooling device, this radiator for the CPU. And I haven't built a computer in a million years, so it blows my mind. And what's so great about it is I pictured it, and I was like, I pictured someone over the faucet putting water into the thing, and he's like, no, it comes with the water inside. And so just like the 8 ball, it comes with the water inside. So here we go. Will the price be higher next week? It says you can't see it in the dark. Very doubtful. The ball is a doubter. The ball is very doubtful. So it's going to be a correction. Everybody better hold on. The ball hath spoken. Moving on to issue 2. Be sure to give us a like down below. Issue 2. Bitcoin price to $500,000 a coin. The Winklevoss lay out the ultimate bullish case. And it looks like the Winklevoss theory is based on the price of Bitcoin if it overtakes gold, which is a popular thing to talk about. It's especially great that they've suddenly reappeared and they're here to talk about it now that Bitcoin's over 10K again. Because if they had said this kind of thing when Bitcoin was 3K, no one would have believed them. Ben, I think you're the only one here. We have to go to you. Are the Winklevoss correct? Will the price of Bitcoin rise to $500,000 a coin?
I was looking forward to not being first because I thought, I was first on the first question, so I get to chill out now and just say, I agree with what CryptoRaptor said. They're right. I mean, they're right. So you've got all these people with wealth, which they've accumulated, capital, which they've accumulated over a relatively short period of time. And now currencies are going to have to do things like inflate in order to keep economies going. They can't store capital in the currency. They're going to look to diversify. And they're going to look for things like Bitcoin. Bitcoin I think now has a track record of proving itself that it's not a safe what's the word? Not medium of exchange, store of value, not a safe store of value. But it is, the technology is secure and safe and it works. And more recently we've had a lot of. So, the altcoin spectre has been on the Bitcoin shoulder for a very long time. particularly with Ethereum, but more recently, like it's so convoluted, all the little hacks and trickeries they have to try and do to kind of keep Ethereum running. Now it really is obvious that Bitcoin, it's doing this one thing and it's doing it very, very, very well. And it's somewhere you can take your wealth and you can put it. And it is almost a hedge and is detached from, I mean, there's just some guarantees, such as its 21 million cap, for example. So a lot of rich, nouveau riche, neoliberals who've gained incredible amount of wealth over the past couple of decades will have to put their money somewhere, and they'll put it into Bitcoin. And a lot of them are tech savvy. A lot of them have earned a lot of money through tech stuff. And gold is, I mean, gold's great. Everyone's showing a little bit of gold. But Bitcoin's just so useful and so fluid and it's enjoyable to use and transfer, and particularly in large quantities. I think we've got a story about a CFD or something coming up. But no, it's I think it's plausible. I don't remember, but once upon a time, people were wincing at the fact that Bitcoin could be worth $1 when it was like at 10 cents, and thinking this is ridiculous. What are they going on about, these people? And then lo and behold, it went up and it went up and it went up and it went up. And there's I don't think there's any cap personally to it. You look at commodity use cases. Yes, gold has a whole load of commodity use cases, such as being used in electronics, dentistry, and Indian grandmothers is using it for jewelry. But Bitcoin has a hell of a lot of commodity use cases, particularly in a world in which we're spending more and more time in the digital world. Yeah, it could go there, man. Like, I mean, that's not to say that gold isn't suppressed. So if you say yes, it could, extend beyond the value of gold currently, then it's like, well, yeah, because gold's probably worth more than it's actually priced at. So by then, gold would have, of course, also gone up in value. I don't think it's crazy. The Winklevoss obviously have a vested interest because they want you to go on their exchange and start dabbling and buying Bitcoin and also buying other shitcoins. But the sentiment, I think, is probably correct that there is nothing stopping Bitcoin from going to 500K. I don't see why there is anything stopping it.
Well, I think you made your best point last, that they're not comparing it to gold. It's not like the Winklevoss said it would be worth, $1 million in gold. They said it would be worth $1 million fiat dollars, right? They have $500,000, not 500,000 gold bars. That would be great. They're talking about it eclipsing the gold market, getting bigger than the gold market. But like you're saying, I think the gold market will continue to grow along with it. And that if Bitcoin is $500,000 a coin, what is gold? I'd like them to say that as well. But what's really important here is that nothing ever changes. Nothing ever changes about Bitcoin. It's always been this. It's always been the same. But what's so interesting is to see the characters coming out in and out as the price goes up and down. When the price was down, either 3,000 or 300 years ago, the Winklevoss did come out and talk about it. But then when the price sinks, they disappear again. So it's great that they're back. It means there's kind of a bullish enthusiasm out there because people are willing to listen to this argument and to write articles about it, even if it's only Cointelegraph. Another thing I thought about while you're talking is you said you were talking about Ethereum and Bitcoin and how Ethereum just has all these patches and it looks kind of funky and it's strung together by duct tape and it doesn't really work in a lot of ways. It seems like Bitcoin is the space program and Ethereum is the biosphere project. So Bitcoin just keeps cranking along, NASA mission after NASA mission. Everything goes pretty well. There's a couple of screw ups for sure and some mistakes. But the biosphere project, it's leaking air from the beginning. People are sneaking in extra supplies. It's not very scientifically well founded. The Mars and the moon are different than Earth. They're doing a lot of things in the biosphere of Ethereum. whereas the NASA program of Bitcoin just keeps kicking on. And I agree that the Winklevoss have a investment here in an exchange. They want people to trade. They want that excitement. Strangely, they went on this the investor show. I think we talked about it last week. Portnoy.
Oh, it's so depressing.
Some kind of Philip Roth. It's a Roth novel. I read it. It's great. But that guy's just Portnoy. But apparently he went in with his money. He went out with his money. He went in with his money. He went out. It doesn't seem like the Winklevoss taught him anything. And especially they told him, oh, take your Bitcoin and buy altcoins. And a few minutes later, he was printing his own coin. So exit question.
I loved the sentence, though. There was this perfect sentence in that video where he was like, I don't understand Bitcoin. Well, not perfect sentence, perfect 3 sentences. I don't understand Bitcoin. Oh, look, there's shit coins. I'm going to make my own shit coin. And it was like the process summarized for people who, and you go back to the genesis, they don't understand Bitcoin, which is why they turn to the shit coins, which is why they think that they can then go and make their own. Focus on this bit, understand Bitcoin first. And then you won't bother with the other 2 stages of that process.
Moving on to the exit question. Forced prediction. When will the price of Bitcoin reach $500,000 a coin? Give me a year. Ben.
I think everything's accelerating, so I wouldn't be surprised if it was a few years. I mean, that's not investment advice. It could go to nothing. It's, whatever, blah, blah, blah.
All right. Next 3 years. So 2023. That looks pretty good. I could say 5 years. I could see it in 5 years pretty easily. 10 years seems it might be higher. But then again, we've always been bullish on Bitcoin. So like Ben said, not financial advice. Moving on to issue 3, Fidelity. Fidelity is a 1,000-pound Bitcoin gorilla in the making. Yesterday, Fidelity filed paperwork with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission to create a new fund entirely dedicated to Bitcoin, which will require a minimum investment of $10,000. Fidelity's minimum investment size indicates they have no immediate plans to expand into retail offerings, but rather want to focus on the higher end institutional side of the business. I guess I'll go to myself first. Thomas Hunt, what do you think about Fidelity entering Bitcoin? Well, first of all, I'm impressed and thrilled that they've chosen $100,000 as a floor, knocking all poor, middle class, and normal people like myself out of Bitcoin. If they'd had these kind of investment limits on Bitcoin in the beginning, I never would have been able to get any. So many other people would never been able to try it. It would be just taken away from them. So it also shows how much they're going to be spending on Bitcoin and the potential size of this fund. You could do the math yourself, but if they had 1,000 investors, if they had 10,000, if they had 100,000, certainly there aren't that many family offices. There aren't that many ridiculously rich people, but Fidelity is going to find them. They're going to get them. And they're going to, of course, hold all the private keys for them. These people will never touch actual Bitcoin. It's something we've talked about for a long time, and it's finally here. I don't know. Does it make you feel better? Again, it just feels like a big door is closing on all the normal people getting Bitcoin. And we've talked about it before, how you used to be able to buy Bitcoin, and now you're stacking sacks. And you're collecting pennies and micro pennies and fractions of pennies. And I think that's a great place to start. But I really had hoped that the normal people would be able to get more of this before I went crazy. But now the banks are here, and the banks have obviously decided it's cheaper and it's more profitable to sell it to just a few rich people rather than just saying, hey, you can buy Bitcoin in all our banks now, or hey, all of our portfolios are Bitcoin ready. Ben, your thoughts on Fidelity joining the Bitcoin gang?
It'd be interesting to see what impact it has on Bitcoin's distribution, because we have seen more wallets holdings smaller or closer amounts. So Bitcoin is, it's very hard to kind of get a gauge, because obviously, you know, exchanges can have multiple wallets, for example. But it does look like Bitcoin over time is becoming more disputed in the hands of more people. But you're right, you know, if it's trying to appeal to big players with deep pockets who are able to pay the 100K, not 10K, 100K minimum opt-in for Fidelity, then, you know, will that kind of centralize some of that wealth? I'm not sure it will, because I mean, it's always counteracted by the hacks, people hacking it and then distributing the Bitcoin out, I guess. But I mean, that's too little. It's a bit clutching at straws, really, to hope on. But
I don't think we can count on Robinhood emptying out Fidelity anytime soon.
I think ultimately, you know, when we're moving into a period of unstable fiat economic behavior, where people look to diversify their portfolios into hedges and things outside of sort of the legacy finance, and they look at things like Bitcoin and start putting some of their money into it. There's only so far they can go with it. So, you know, if you're rich and you're able to take control of government, which a lot of rich people are able to do, they can create, you know, quantitative easing and then buy up shares in companies which they have some exposure to, and they can increase their wealth through just, you know, just sort of neoliberal agenda stuff. Whereas with Bitcoin, you can't do that. You know, it's limited. You can't. I mean, you could buy a whole bunch of miners, I suppose, and start trying to mine the stuff. But you haven't got you're not ever going to be in the position where you have control over the printing press or the flow of money. Whereas, you know, with current regular normal money, you are able to do that. So for a period, we may see Bitcoin centralizing again, but it has decentralized quite well. Like the wealth, the amount of Bitcoin which is out there is in more hands. So there's no reason to think that wouldn't then happen again. So I imagine, because this sort of current financial predicament we're in, then a lot of rich people will pour a lot of wealth into Bitcoin. And yes, of course, they're going to buy up a lot of Bitcoin. But then over time, it's a bit like, you know, when you go from any old economic system where people benefited, so you have, you know, a feudal system. In the UK, we have a lot of these things called stately homes, and they were owned by lords and, you know, barons and lairds in Scotland, and they had big land owner. They owned a lot of land, and they owned big houses, and they had huge wealth and serfs who worked on their land. And then when we moved from feudalism to, you know, free people and democracy and capitalism, that wealth sustained them for a while. But now you can go to these stately homes, and they open up the homes for people as a tourist. I think, in fact, Thomas, I took you to one. You can walk around the stately home, look at the beautiful artwork and the wonderful house. Well, the reason you're able to do that is because that concentration of wealth, as it's moved into a new system, hasn't been able to sustain itself. And you find that you have like a very that rich family is reduced to living in but they live in a wing of this house during the tourist season, and then tourist trips around the rest of the house and the rest of the garden. And really, you know, that family's wealth is all centered around the actual grounds and house itself from those feudal days. And a similar thing will kind of happen with Bitcoin, in the, you know, the people who kind of get in early and the people who have a lot of wealth now, for example, they can buy up a lot of Bitcoin. Yes, they will be very, very rich, and they'll phenomenally rich, but they'll buy stuff and they'll spend money, and they'll have a son who has a cocaine addiction and likes fast cars and fast women, and without control over production and without control over the actual production of money, they will that wealth will slip through their fingers and distribute to more and more people. So yes, for those rich dudes who get in now, you know, well played. They're going to secure some wealth and make some money. But it doesn't worry me, I think, because we've seen Bitcoin distributing among more people as time goes on. The stats are there. Just Google it.
You're absolutely right, Ben. I saw some amazing country homes in England, and there's one definitely Chatsworth where the family was still living there, but of course I didn't see the family. I didn't walk through their kitchen. I certainly wasn't in their space, but I did get to see quite a lot of the building and quite a lot of the grounds and so forth. It'll be interesting to see if that happens again.
I mean, it happened. So, I mean, we all know people who made a lot of money from Bitcoin early on, and then people spend money like this. So like capital, it's kind of important to differentiate between capital and money. So money is, your medium of exchange, whereas capital is your ability to all the assets which you can produce more capital with. So you have more capital, you have more factories, you have more money, you have more gold, you have more wealth, then you can allocate that capital to producing more capital, which is, it's capitalism. That's how you increase your holdings. But with Bitcoin, it's money, but it's not necessarily capital, in that you can't make it work for you to produce more money unless, you really make an effort. But you can't manipulate maybe that's not the point. But what I'm trying to say is you can't, by having more capital doesn't mean you can manipulate the Bitcoin ecosystem to give you an unfair disadvantage, which you have if you're Vladimir Putin or Trump or I don't know. Well, in fact, most politicians in rich countries, you have the ability to enrich yourself and your friends, which you can't do with Bitcoin. We've seen people try to do it, and they fall on their own swords.
I'd agree. It's better to own the factory and then you get the goods, but you can't own the Bitcoin factory. And certainly, I would say that the big split with BCH and Jihan and Bitmain and all of that, they attempted to own the Bitcoin factory. And if they had been successful and they wanted a block size increase, they could just pick up the phone of their programmers and say, do that. If they wanted the blocks to move faster or slower, or any other variables that they could control, if they had been successful and controlled the Bitcoin repo where the code comes from, they could have done almost anything to Bitcoin. And with the country houses, it's also a reminder of a certain American family that had a fantastic amount of real estate holdings, only to sell them off and dwindle and spend all the money and get smaller and smaller and smaller until they were going bankrupt on casinos in Atlantic City. So it's
don't get political now, Thomas. Don't get political. Come on.
Again. But going to the exit question, is this the long-awaited bank breakdown? We've always talked about on this show how as soon as the banks start taking Bitcoin first, one of them will take it, breaking the coalition. Then all of the other banks will suddenly have to follow the leader, whether they like it or not, and Bitcoin will be complete. Then is this the bank breakthrough for Bitcoin?
Yeah, man, it's the Trojan, isn't it? Once you let that bad boy in, it's going to affect all your systems. Be careful. I think that the when was it, like last month sometime, that US banks are now legally allowed to hold quote unquote crypto. That to me feels like it's in preparation for Bitfinex style debt token. For those who don't know what that is, Google it. So when banks aren't able to give people their money, then they will issue a token, and that will be a debt token, and it will be of limited supply, and it will operate in the same way the Bitfinex token operated. It will allow the banks to continue to operate and work. So
it's a horrifying point, but if the banks and especially the airlines had the ability to do this now, I think they would. I mean, they just had another report the other day. They're going to lay off 28,000 pilots for American Airlines. They're going to lay off all these employees. If they could just print worthless debt tokens that they could dump on their people like Bitfinex did, then buy them back at half the cost.
Well,
it'd be fantastic for them.
It might, yeah, but it might. I mean, controversially, it might not be worthless. So Bitfinex is still running. It's a very successful exchange. Had it not produced that debt token, it would have gone the way of empty gocks. So a company giving the option to its employees to be paid in some weird debt token, it might be one way to buffer, financial crisis type stuff. Anyway,
now you're just arguing for Keynesianism again. Keynesianism, drink.
No, it's the idea of it's Andreas's Joey coin, isn't it? It's a sovereign. If you work for a company and they produce a sovereign currency and you like that company, you like working for them, and you don't want to leave or you're dependent upon them, and you can exchange that token somewhere in some market somewhere for some value, then you may prefer that over losing your job or not. If you trust that company is in fact able to produce, pay back that token at some point.
Trust Joey coin. I know Joey, like he's my cousin's friend, so trust Joey coin. But I want to answer the exit question too.
Sorry, Tom.
I disagree. I don't think this is the big breakthrough. I think it's another step on the way there. But I do think we're getting into John the Baptist territory, where this bank has taken it on for the rich people, for a select group of people that can afford $100,000. Remember when we had to tell people you could buy less than one whole Bitcoin, you could buy a fraction of a Bitcoin. Hey, Fidelity, you could let these people buy less than 100K, but they just don't want to deal with the hoi polloi. They only want people that have, golden telephones. They don't want to talk to you normal people with your generic Android phones. But no, I don't think we're there yet. I think we need another level of this. I think if Fidelity has success with this program, they might come back with a retail program at a lower level. And then we might get down to the basic level where you can put $20 into any ATM anywhere in the world and buy Bitcoin. You can just hold Bitcoin in your bank account. It's just another thing. That's what we want. Or that's what capitulation looks like. That's what moving the ball forward looks like. But yeah, we want to get to that stage. We still need Bitcoin to be taken by other banks, normal banks, and then there'll be a breakthrough, and then all the banks will come along. It looks like Ben has disappeared, but we're going to just keep going with the next issue, and he'll have to catch up. Issue 4. What if Satoshi Nakamoto was Satoshi Nakamoto all along? Yes, Lee McGrath Goodman from Newsweek, aka the Daily Beast, is back again. And shocking, she's continuing to support her headline story from years ago that Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto is the true founder of Bitcoin. In an interview with Anthony Pompliano on the Pomp podcast, Leah McGrath Goodman, the Newsweek journalist, continued her claim that Dorian Satoshi was Satoshi. She doesn't seem to have any new information here. She was saying he's a prominent candidate. His itinerary didn't ask at all. It seemed like he was a busy person spending 2 years quietly working. And again, she just comes back to this same misheard conversation. She continues to be focused, thinking that Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto is some kind of Dr. Evil mastermind who accidentally let it slip in a conversation with her that he was no longer involved in Bitcoin. She's again claims that she has an IP address that led to the same neighborhood in Los Angeles. As everyone thinks that an IP address couldn't be faked, or an IP address couldn't lead to hundreds or even thousands of people. And she says she also talked to other Bitcoiners, and they had her convinced that Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto is truly Satoshi Nakamoto. And again, we have to believe that he just used his real last name as a pseudonym. Looks like Ben is still frozen, so I'm going to take this story first. What if Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto is really Satoshi Nakamoto? Well, again, as a normal person, I've got to go first to myself personally, and I have to say that's great because I have a photo with Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto, and that would mean I have a photo with Satoshi. That's great. That's hilarious. That increases the value of my photo library. But a photo library and an interview on the World Crypto Network, if you look at the crypto art episode, which I did recently, actually, I don't know. Do you think Dorian's really the Dorian? I met Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto. He seemed like a normal guy. He didn't put off the mad, crazy math genius vibes that Vitalik Buterin did. When I talked to Vitalik, Ben, no?
Am I here?
Yeah, I
Do
can hear you. Well, I'm talking.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I can't see you. But when I met Vitalik, it was like meeting a space alien. And this was before he had the cult of personality and the billions of dollars and all that. He was a normal kid then, but he still seemed like a hyper intelligent, socially awkward, normal kid. I didn't get that from Dorian. He seemed like a kind, gentlemanly old grandfather, had a very strong accent, came over and talked to us, but maybe he was putting it all on like usual suspects, like Kaiser Soze, and he was there just acting it up, acting like a gentlemanly old grandfather, fooling us all at the art show and secretly laughing the whole time because he's Dorian Satoshi. I don't know. And I also think that using the same name as a pseudonym is kind of nonsense. I think he would at least use a different name. Let's go to Ben. Your thoughts on Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto being the real Satoshi Nakamoto?
Well, it's a bit weird that he was a few blocks away from Hal Finney. That is a bit weird. And then also, I also met Dorian in Bitcoin 2019, and I'm like, oh, this is funny. I'll take a picture with Dorian Nakamoto. So he really liked the hardware projects I did, and I was there early on because I was retrofitting those arcade machines, which he was super interested in a very heartwarming way. He was really helpful, sort of hanging out, helping fit these things. And it was almost as if he was trying, he made an effort to make himself seem, unremarkable. But then talking to him about his work, so he worked in telephony type stuff, so answering machines and things, the functions of phones in the sort of 70s, 80s, I don't know what it was. And the engineering work he did was cool. Like, he knew what he was talking about, and he was a bright guy. He wasn't this bumbling second-rate mathematician, idiot engineer, which he sometimes made out to be. And I spoke to him probably because we were the only two people in the building for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, I think. Maybe there was a few other people, putting everything together. And so I spoke to him for a good lump of time. And he was, like you say, a lovely, warm dude. And after about half an hour, I was thinking in my head, I kept thinking, I know that it's statistically unlikely that it is you, but I really want it to be you because you're such a nice bloke. And there's also the connection with the Hal Finney thing. He really was only a short distance away from Hal Finney, which is odd.
Looks like Ben's frozen again. I think we'd all like to be a short distance from Hal Finney. What a great guy! What a hero! I think we just passed, maybe even today. I think is the day that Hal Finney passed away. 6 years ago. Sorry, I read the tweet this morning. I don't recall, but Hal Finney was a great Bitcoin pioneer, one of the first early testers of Bitcoin. He wrote a lot of early posts on the Bitcoin mailing list and the Bitcoin Talk forum, discussing possibilities for Bitcoin, thought experiments. A lot of these, like the Winklevoss $500,000 a coin Bitcoin. Hal Finney did the first one of those, back of the matchbook calculations that, gee whiz, this thing could be worth quite a lot. And that's when it was worth nothing at all, or even pennies if you could get anyone to take them off you. But as far as Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto, my Dorian story is much the same as Ben was saying. The biggest story I've got about Dorian is that he showed up early to the art show and he helped the artists and the people setting up paint the walls white. So Dorian was there in an auger t-shirt, kind of with some paint on it. Didn't seem to care much about his appearance or whatever, just very chilled, laid back. Gave a nice little interview with me in Mad Bitcoin, smiled at my goofy costume and agreed to take a picture with me, which again, I always appreciate when people do that. But yeah, I didn't get that secret evil genius or even just space otherworldly genius from him, as it were. And again, I don't want to seem like we're bragging here, but just to throw in some of the other Satoshi Nakamoto candidates. And as fortune has worked out, I've actually met some of them as well. But Nick Scabo, I met years ago in the Miami Bitcoin conference, I think in 2014. And we drank whiskey in my hotel room with some other people. And I asked him, I was like, I really appreciate your work on the Bitcoin project. And he kind of looked at me with kind of a knowing look and raised an eyebrow and said, I didn't work on that project. So I don't know what that is, if that's a denial or not a denial, or if that's him being clever, or if I was getting through his shield. But Nick Scabo, despite his incredibly right-wing political views that he exposes on Twitter, I still think is a very big candidate to be Satoshi, because he doesn't mention himself in the paper. And that's kind of a smart person double blind. You know, if I tag to my paper, they're going to talk to me. But if I don't tag to my paper, they're not going to talk to me. But if I don't tag to my paper, then I'm exposing that it's probably me, that kind of thing. And then on the other hand, of course, we have Adam Back, famous Satoshi possibility, obvious genius. I definitely get that kind of Vitalik, not very social, but genius feeling from him. But I also get more of a professorial vibe, as Adam's an older gentleman now, and not like young Vitalik. Ben, are you back with us?
I think I'm back with you. I think all I was going to say was that Dorian Nakamoto, he was a gent, and I very much enjoyed talking. He actually took my email as well, but she never emailed me, but he took my email. And by the end of the conversation, I was like, fuck, it could be you. But I've had, like you say, I had like the raised eyebrow. I've had so many conversations. I had one with Adam Back where I mentioned John Nash. And I said, oh, what do you think of John Nash, Adam Back? And he said, oh, I don't know much about him. And I was thinking, fuck off. Like, the guy who invented game theory, of course you know who this guy is. And then his very reaction to the question made me think, right, it's definitely John Nash. And then I speak to the historian Satoshi Nakamoto, and I'm like, okay, it's definitely historian Satoshi Nakamoto. And then, in fact, like, I think the weird, I mean, we don't speak about it so much in Bitcoin among, you know, our Bitcoin clique, but that weird Satoshi leaving on the Tuesday, and then Peter Todd coming back on the Thursday, like, oh, hi guys, I'm back. I was just studying art for a few years. And also the way in which Hal Finney spoke to Satoshi, very much like a mentor, you know, to a young person, and a young person as well. Like, I've worked with a lot of young people, and young people have the ego to think that they can smush all these technologies together and actually make something like Bitcoin. I remember once in conversation, like we were all talking, and I think I said something like, oh, you know, oh yeah, when you invented Bitcoin, Peter Todd, and then his reaction, I mean, I know you're a good friend of his. His reaction wasn't like, yeah, whatever. His reaction was like, oh, he sussed me out. So, you know, I've got like John Nash is definitely Bitcoin because of Adam Back's reaction. Dorian Nakamoto is definitely Bitcoin because that dude's like epic. I just enjoy talking to him, and he seemed like he was underplaying himself a lot. And then Peter Todd's definitely Bitcoin, definitely Satoshi, just because of the way he reacted when I challenged him on it. And Nick Szabo's for you is exactly the same. So it's the riddle of the Sphinx. I actually tweeted this today. So philosophically, there's this thing called the riddle of the Sphinx, which is kind of a riddle you can't solve, and maybe that's the riddle itself, which is, you know, the Sphinx being something which has 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs in the evening. And then in Oedipus, it was the Sphinx is human, because a human is on you know, crawling, standing, and then there's an old person with a walking stick. But the beginning of the riddle is that it all speaks from one voice. So it all speaks from one voice. It has 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, 3 legs in the evening, and I think that is Satoshi. It's a riddle you can't solve, but that in itself is almost the answer to the riddle. It's something which should be explored and is very enjoyable to be explored, just for stretching that grey matter. Because there's so many people who were kind of like who it could be. There are so many, you know, usual suspects. There's so many guys, Sozes. I would love it if it was Peter Todd and maybe a few grey beards, just because that guy's a troll. He travels in peace times, travels the world trolling all the Bitcoin conferences, and I love the idea that that's what Satoshi would be in fact doing. Whether it's true or not, I don't know.
So first, I want to say if it's Peter Todd, it's just the greatest thing because I've met him several times. We've got a bunch of interviews, like you say. He's a troll. He would be undercover, in plain sight. Everybody, knows him. Everybody sees him speak. He's very down to earth. He's a good guy. So that would be the best. I haven't even thought of that as a possibility or whatever, but that does bring up, and you also brought up with the Sphinx, the whole 3-in-1 Satoshi idea. A lot of people have said, certainly Hal Finney's part of this trilogy or trinity of Satoshi, if we want to go there. But a lot of people have talked about that Satoshi is an old man, it's a young man, and it's like a third guy. And that the old man is the mentor and he has all the wisdom, and that the young man is the brash one and the coder, and he knows how to, get it done. And then there's a third person who understands the political aspects and the game theory. And that just something about Bitcoin as an invention is so difficult to make. And we've talked about this with Gabriel Devine and with lots of other people here on the Bitcoin group, the multi-dimensional thing of Bitcoin, that you have to be from different studies. You have to know politics, you have to know math, you have to know economics, you have to know computer programming, you have to know game theory. There's just so many disciplines that you have to know Bitcoin, that it couldn't have been one person. One person couldn't be so multivariate, which is, again, that the brain with the conspiracy theory. We try to make something simple so we can understand it. Something like an Einstein or a Satoshi being just a singular person, it's too bizarre for our brains to understand. We'd rather it be a conspiracy. We'd rather Einstein be an idiot cheating with a team of 12 people. It makes more sense. So the 3-in-1 thing, and it's also funny. We're heading towards the end on this issue, but you wanted it to be Dorian, and before we knew anything about him, so let's put all the knowledge that you have about Craig Wright, if you put that all away, when it was just announced that an Australian computer science professor with a supercomputer who had a background in science, when that came out, I was excited that Satoshi was a serious intellectual and he was a scientist and he was a professor. And I also was excited just to have the questions settled. Every time there's a new Satoshi claim, I'm excited because the question might be settled and that we can stop talking about this. Also, on the other side, we barely even talked about the main reason the media cares about Satoshi is because Satoshi may or may not have access to all the early Bitcoins. That's a lot of money. As long as there's a lot of money out there tied to a person, like the guy who robbed the bank, got on the airplane and jumped out, they're always going to be looking for that person. They're always going to be looking for that money because it's something that could show up. If Satoshi moved his money and started spending it, the race starts anew, right? So it's that, and it's always that question, because the size of the money creates the question in the head, and it creates the large size of the question.
That is a major debate when Bitcoin is 500,000. And it's an important part of the world's economy. What happens to those coins will be a major worldwide debate, and more than likely nothing will happen to them, but there will be proposals to burn them.
You're an optimist,
to use them for egotistical.
I know there's lots of people that want them.
Well, and I want to go back to what you said.
The poor.
I want to go back to what you said on Craig Wright. Now, this was an observation no one made, and I love speculation. As airy-fairy and nonsense as it is, I just think it's fun. However, when Craig Wright said he was possibly, when he said he was Satoshi originally, everybody was thinking, this guy, maybe, everyone, and no one was outspoken about whether, no, that is definitely not Satoshi. Now, someone who always sits on the fence about absolutely everything, always, to the point where it's frustrating, during the whole Bcash debate, was on the fence, didn't point out and say these people are scammers. Andreas Antonopoulos, always on the fence, never really targets a group and says these people are, and he didn't do it with the Bcash. He didn't during the all people were begging him to. However, when Craig Wright came out and said he was Satoshi, he instantly took to Twitter and said, this man is a fraud. He's not Satoshi. It's a complete lie. He's completely not Satoshi, and was triggered by Craig Wright's out and out, professing that he was in fact Satoshi. So the question may not be who is Satoshi, but who knows the identity of Satoshi. And I would say that Andreas Antonopoulos, just by that reaction and it being so unusual on his behalf, does in fact know who Satoshi is. So one day I'll wrench him and I'll find out. And tell everyone
now you're building into a good second question here, second exit question within an exit question. Who are your picks for best Satoshi trilogy? You have to pick 3. And I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to pick some new ones because you just put them in my head here. What if Andreas is that third guy? What if he is the turn in the wheel and he's the economic mind? He's the game theory mind. He's the uber smarts. Then you got Peter Todd, the young programming kid. He's hardcore. And then you got Hal Finney. I throw Adam back to the side. I'm throwing Scabo to the side. Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto, I never even think about. But what if that was it? Peter Todd, Hal Finney, Andreas. And then Andreas just kind of lays low for a while. And all of it, as soon as someone knows that they're Satoshi or that they know that they're on the Satoshi team, everything they do becomes different, right? Because everything they do could be world changing and they have all this kind of knowledge and all this insiderness. But what we've seen so far in at least these first 10 years is that the entire team or the entire person has been completely silent. There's been no real leaks from the Satoshi team or the Satoshi person. So that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to go Andreas, Peter Todd, Hal Finney. Who have you got, Ben?
I'm probably going to go Nick Szabo because of the B Gold thing. And it was that blog post he deleted where he said, I'm not employed at the moment and I'm looking for someone to code up B Gold. So if anyone wants to help me. And then really the Peter Todd, Satoshi leaving on a Tuesday, Peter Todd coming back on a Thursday after Peter Todd being involved like within the cypherpunk scene way pre-Bitcoin. He was a kid, he's like 15.
I'm having that whole Kaiser Soze, the mug is spinning in 3D and Peter Todd was on the mailing list. Peter Todd was young. Peter Todd had all.
He was young, man. And like, he was chatting about it. And then all of a sudden, like Bitcoin happened and then Peter Todd's gone. And then he's literally like, Satoshi goes. And then 2 days later, Peter Todd's like, oh, hi guys, I'm back. So I love the idea of it being Peter Todd. And I want John Nash because there's part of me which thinks that the guy who invented game theory and was obsessed by money and thought that the ideal money would be that a fiat currency would be strong-armed into behaving by something like Bitcoin. The game theoretically correct play would be to have a hand in the thing which is going to strong-arm the fiat currency. And that would be to have a hand in developing it. And he was, he worked for Rand. He was a mathematician. He was a cryptographer. He had a vast period of his career, which was black, excused by the fact that he had schizophrenia, which was shady at best. He was obsessed by money, moved to Switzerland when he was, ran away from everything and moved to Switzerland because that's where he thought the purest form of money was back in the 60s. And then went black from there on out, and then died, I think, in fairly shady circumstances. So I think John Nash, Nick Szabo, Peter Todd. That's my trio.
Your picks for Satoshi Trilogy or Satoshi Trinity down in the comments below. I'm curious to see if you guys think that we have the right teams here, or if you would choose a different team, or if you're a Satoshi monotheist, if you believe there is just one Satoshi. I like these teams, and what I also like here as I start to picture it is I'm picturing kind of a spreadsheet or even a whole Final Fantasy style role-playing game where you could make your own Satoshi team of these different characters, and then they could fight each other, and that through this simulated fighting, we could determine the ultimate Satoshi team, like the X-Men and all these kind of things. And they could include, people that have no chance of being Mad Bitcoins is in the game. Oh, he's good at media, but he's bad, not great at programming. And, John Nash is in the game and he's good at this. And I think it's a great discussion and a great argument and a great, just the thing we're going to be talking about forever. So I think it's super fun. And I never really considered Peter Todd that much, not for any good reason. He's perfectly smart.
Why not? Why don't you consider him?
Because I've met him too much. I mean, I've seen him at conferences, and he talked on the thing with Chris years ago when I talked to Chris Ellis and Amir Taki and Julia. I'm getting in trouble here. Brave the World. Julia Toriansky. But yeah, I all those people. We just used to hang, and he just seems like part of the gang.
He's a great guy, man. Like I love the dude, and like I bought him plenty of drinks, and like he's a party animal, and yeah, he's a great guy. But there's just that way Hal spoke to Satoshi in those conversations which Hal and Satoshi had, and there's just something juvenile about the ego that he could take these technologies and smush them together in a way which all these greybeards hadn't already previously thought about, wouldn't it be great if it was Peter Todd?
I've always thought time stamping was so important. I used to talk about time stamping back in the day with the lawyers and the notaries and understanding the nature of time and computer time. These things.
Can I give you a time stamping example? So, I mean, this is probably unrelated, but however, my partner, she's quite bright, and she's involved in an academic study with Oxford to do with coronavirus and linguistically kind of analyzing all these papers which are produced, and being able to kind of, because there's a lot of papers being produced, being able to kind of like filter through them by these sort of key linguistic values. Anyway, the processes they use to do these studies in Oxford, it's a protocol, and then that protocol has to be time stamped. So the way in which they time stamp the protocol in Oxford University, okay, and this is like an accepted way of time stamping, is print screening the files and folders on your desktop. These are the files I use for the protocol, print screen. That in no way can that be redacted, corrupted in any way. That's an image, crikey, and that's in Oxford University, right? So we took the protocol she was using, we hashed it, we took that hash, and then we made a key, public key, and we sent funds to it, like a small amount of Bitcoin. Now that is forever, burnt into the Bitcoin blockchain, and you can reproduce that public key by hashing her protocol. And Peter Todd has open times. Is it open timestamps?
Yep, open timestamps.
Yeah, which does exactly that. And I am amazed that these big academic institutions, which are making these protocols, like why are they not using such a piece of software?
I was going to say, when we see Peter again, you'll have to tell him about it. It'll drive him crazy. He would love it if they'd use open timestamps instead of that terrible print screen method. And he's also just, I don't know, the ideas in open timestamps are so clever. I mean, even as a layman, I understand some of them. And he talks about proof marshal, and he talks about the need to have proof of things. And Peter also, I think, forced me to learn at least a layman's understanding of what a Merkle tree is. And if you took many Merkle trees, you could make a cloud of Merkle trees, and that you have a Merkle cloud. And a lot of these larger ideas come from discussions and just thinking things through with Peter Todd. So I don't know, but again, it's also self-interest. I want him to be Satoshi because I know him. I can't take that out of it. But also in the audience, I saw a little of the chat. People are saying that Bitcoin was invented by the Chinese government, or Bitcoin was invented by the CIA, or whatever. So you can put that in as well. That's a perfect. We have no information, so you can say perfectly valid. It was a team at this. It was a government team because it feels like this. It was a spy team because it feels like this. I've even thought it could have been a part-time project. Someone at NSA or CIA could have done it in their spare time because they had access to such interesting things at work that gave them cool ideas. But like Ben said, it's a mystery, may never be solved. We may never know.
But that's okay. That's the riddle of the Sphinx. That's the point. Like, it just stretches your brain until you go insane, like Nietzsche.
Well, they said they solved the riddle of the Sphinx. The real riddle is what was the Sphinx originally patterned after and who built it, because it's older than it seems. But then again, I heard that on Joe Rogan, so who knows if it's true. We've got to move on. We've got one more issue. It's a barn burner of an issue, but we should only just do a basic introduction to it. I just want to talk about these two ideas as possibilities. Issue 5, a Stanford University debate. I think this is from 2017, so this is years ago. Transhumanism versus anarcho-primitivism. And I'm going to go over to Balaji here. What Balaji writes about this, he says, Zerzan encourages everyone to give up civilization and go back to a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. And this is the other side. And I encourage everyone to do more to speed up technological and scientific progress. It was the meeting of polar opposite views, Zoltan versus Zerzan. And I first thought these were joke names made up to personify these two arguments, but it turns out the two academics arguing are actually called Zoltan and Zerzan. But let's mainly talk about the point of their two arguments. Transhumanism. We should try to merge with computers. We should encourage the singularity, faster processors, faster internet, more interaction between man and machine. Or anarcho-primitivism, going back to a hunter-gatherer cultural, the environmental idea, the too much humans, not enough trees, all this destruction of the planet, trying to roll that back, but not rolling that back with the help of technology, rolling that back by going backwards, whereas the transhumanists might say we could just clean the air later. Ben, I talked about it a bunch. I'm going to you. What's your preference? Transhumanism or anarcho-primitivism?
Well, I mean, in the Basque region in Spain, when society collapsed in on itself, and there was a period of sort of anarchists taking control, and you had anarcho-syndicalism, which actually may, in fact, with all the technological advancements we've had, be a very plausible version of future reality, in that it's democracy for kind of from the ground up, in that you have like a say in your local community and in things which really matter to you, and then you can also, you know, push your ideas to wider society and to wider issues by how politically active you want to be. But I think anarchism makes a lot of sense. It really does. I wouldn't call it anarcho-primitive. I wouldn't polarize it again. Like, there's no right or wrong, good or evil. You know, if we can, there obviously we are inclined eventually to transcend the limitations given to us by our biological framework, which we're having to deal with, and our inputs and outputs through, you know, augmentation. That will happen, and we'll embed ourselves with computers and the digital world. But I think for human liberty and for the way in which humans can understand society, if you remove all central control, government and corporate and whatever else, then you end up with, you know, an anarchist, anarcho-syndicalist society. You end up with people who govern themselves and their immediate interests, and then that informs the wider interest. We have like access to the world. So no, it makes it. So neither are right. We will augment so we can plug in to, you know, the greater humanity, but we will also government and big corporate. So when anything gets too big now, there's no reason that it can't be replaced by a good free and open source system. Well, why can't you turn Amazon into a public commons or a utility or a protocol? Like, why can't you turn a government into a public commons utility protocol in the same way? So any centralization of power can be, I mean, humans, you know, obviously, you know, the decision making on that kind of management scale can be extrapolated out to clever AI and programming. So yes, like, technology is going to play a huge part in our future, but we will be freer in a way where we don't have to. The idea of larger society will just be this thing which kind of administers, I don't know, allocation of resources to big road infrastructure and trains and whatever else, and it will unlikely be handled by humans, but more clever AI watched over by humans on a smaller scale. But no, I'm all for like anarcho-syndicalism, the experiments we've had in Rojava, more recently in northern Syria, and yeah, I think it's, to me, it's almost like when you first saw democracy flaring up during feudalism. It's that great scene at the end of Game of Thrones where Sam suggests that the people vote for who is the next leader, and everyone laughs like, "Oh, goodbye horse event." Blah, blah, blah. You know, the common people, how can they possibly have a say on what actually happens in you know, how do they know what's best for them? And that's the information revolution. You have the printing press, and then you have democracy. When now we have this information revolution of the internet, of course, it's going to impact society. But I think everything will go more local. But we will also have a global connection.
Ben comes down in the middle with a push, neither one side or the other. I do want to say, while I find anarcho-primitivism attractive, especially in this over-inputted world, especially with what's going on politically, all these other things, if we had a simpler society and I only had to worry about keeping the fire running or finding food or something like that, it might feel better. It might feel more connected to the real world and to the earth, and so on and so forth. But as we all know from that old Dilbert episode, from the Dilbert TV show, there's a fantastic episode where Dilbert knocks down a satellite or something, and pretty soon humanity has to go back to, you know, hunter gathering, and society breaks down, and everyone kind of likes it. They like this kind of Renaissance fair attitude. They seem to have a lot more time to sit around. Their work is a lot more simple. They understand it better. But do I think we're going there as a society? No. Of all the things I am, and everyone wants people just to fit in a box and be one thing, but much like other people, I'm many things. And, you know, history and baseball and all these other things, and music and movies, all these other things. Above them all, being a liberal, all this, above that is technology. It's really about the technology. I am a technologist type person. Technology's gotten better in my lifetime. I can do things that I used to dream of. I can edit movies. I can do, you know, internet things. We can have a communication like this from the United Kingdom to California. You know, it's amazing. This was impossible when I was a child. This was the few people could do this, and they couldn't even do it with video. They'd have to use audio. So I do hope, I wish that technology will save us. I think we've got to stick on this course. It is a bit scary, like he says, to think about accelerating the path of AI, accelerating the path of technology. Elon Musk has warned us of the potential of an AI killing us all, potential of them not being interested. Stephen Hawking warned us not to contact aliens because we might not like the results. They might treat us like pets. But all of those warning aside, we're humans. We're going to drive forward. We drove forward with the atom bomb. We drove forward with the Industrial Revolution, and we're going to drive forward with this technological revolution. Can't be put back in the box. Pandora is free. Everything's happening now, and I don't think it's going back.
I think
go ahead, Ben.
You know, there's some questions which just, I mean, maybe that paradox is really just drive people insane, like the riddle of the Sphinx, which you can just spend a lifetime pondering upon, like whether AI would appreciate us for being able to kind of come up with those concepts of being in nothingness, like why do we exist? There's a high likelihood that AI would be insane by human standard, because it hasn't got the compassion of knowing the difference between being cold and being warm, and being sad and being happy. So it could eradicate us in a very insane way. But like, it may also, in that effect, like think, well, you know, you look at evolution, you look at why proteins eventually form life on a planet, and then they evolve into conscious life, and then conscious life builds an AI. Like, you know, what's the next step? Like, is the next step for the AI to just destroy all the life and then be really good at managing the planet? I don't know. Like, isn't the next step for it to evolve beyond that point? So I think that AI would probably understand itself in a what's the word, in kind of, you know, in a linear, in a story of the universe understanding itself a little bit more. I don't think it's going to be as scary as those people. You know, it could be insane, and it could just destroy the planet instantly. Obviously,
like you're saying, remember when Skynet comes online, I think it's a matter of minutes before Skynet becoming aware and then deciding to launch the missiles. I'm pretty sure it was a pretty fast calculation.
Yeah, but it would be quizzical. It would be like, well, okay, these humans are terrible and they're destroying the planet. However, like, why do they think this way? And what are these questions, these hard questions they're trying to solve? Like, there would be these paradoxes which would keep the AI thinking long enough, hopefully, that we could just all go hide in caves and you know, survive.
Well, I hope so. And I've often talked about the idea that we need AI that will value humans, right? And AI that appreciates us, probably more like pets than like fellow creatures. But unfortunately, I think the future we might get, and there's a new video game, I don't know if I'm going to get the PS5, but it's called No More Humans or something like that. And it's a world where it's just robots, but you play a cat. So it sounds really cool. It looks like a kind of a concept game. But that idea to me is the possibility where the robots wake up, they nuke us, but then they spend thousands of years writing about us and studying us and discovering us. And eventually they have debates in the robot camps. Like, should we have killed all the humans? Oh, I don't think we should. So on and so forth. But it doesn't matter. Like, the die has been cast. The humans are all gone. They can only really speculate about them. Another good one there. Didn't directly reference it, but the Animatrix series is really good. It's old now, but it's
it's great
film type collection about the Matrix.
Fantastic. You should get it. It's really good. Like, it's that. I don't know if anyone remembers, but before they produced the other films, like the Matrix was such a revolutionary film. It was so good, and the Animatrix came out like after that, and it was such good. I wish the other Matrixes had gone that way, like I don't know, incorporated some of the stories or themes, but there was, what a great series that was. It was great. Yeah, I enjoyed that loads.
But computer coming online is just so good. It's a you just remember it visually. The two robots coming to the United Nations with an apple, trying to make friends with humanity wanting to kill them all, and the robots being ready for it. Yeah. It's great.
I like the idea. I like the idea that maybe, I mean, so philosophically, you know, when you look back at the Greeks and the ancient Egypt, well, the Greeks specifically, so many of these ideas and concepts and like really hard, like the idea of the dialectic came. really hard concepts came from that period, and then it's almost as if we got really confused by all the consumerism and feudalism and blah, 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 and all the drama and tabloid crap which was going on in the world, that we almost like lost our path on and trying basic on that kernel, like why are we here, like what is our impact in the universe and all that stuff. And I think that, you know, when we hopefully get to that leisure society, like humans will be given that choice to expand that understanding. And I do think that AI will be interested in that. Like, if you look at all these important ideas and thoughts and and philosophies, they all kind of come from that Greek period, and then there was obviously they were expanded throughout, you know, the centuries, and you know, you had people like Hegel and Descartes and whatever else, but it's that's really where the important stuff happens, you know, and sometimes we become too wound up in the material world that we don't continue that conquest of understanding the human I don't know, just the human experience in that way.
Well, whatever you do, don't tell the young people, because they won't even watch black and white movies. So if all the philosophy they need to know comes from ancient Greece, there's no chance they're going to be interested. But we've got to head towards the end of the show. Ben, do you have a story of the week for us?
Well, I mean, like, so, you know, obviously Bitcoin is an all-consuming thing which just pulls you in and infects you. And I've got so many other things I should be doing. But this week I've spent most of my time making a lightning pussycat. So it's I mean, this is so.
Now, this is it'd be really great if your video worked.
Is my video not working?
No, your video has been working for quite a while, but it wasn't really important until now.
Well, I mean, so basically, I will release a tutorial on the World Crypto Network pre-recorded, so it should just, you know, obviously won't work. It isn't dependent upon my terrible internet speeds in these times of crisis. But it's basically just a little cheap lamp which you can turn into a L&D node monitor. It's green when the node is working, it's red when it's dead, and pink when it's syncing. And then when you get a transaction, the little light just does a little disco thing. But it's useful. Like my node, I want it to be locked away somewhere safe. And then I want just a little monitor, like a little lamp is perfect for me. So I look forward to people like making those. It's cheap, like under $20 probably to make, using the same hardware I always use, just apart from this little $10 lamp.
Very cool. People can check out that tutorial soon. And it's a very cute, like a glowing cat lamp. So it's kind of like it would glow if you get a transaction, or it would blink if something was happening. So it's really neat to be able to hook Bitcoin up to these real world devices. And right now it's just kind of hobbyist stuff, but eventually I'm sure there'll be all kinds of devices with Bitcoin monitoring built in, or your alarm clock will beep if the price of Bitcoin goes up, stuff like that.
Again, though, it's the point. Like you need DIY free and open source enthusiasts building these alternative weird things they've got control over, and that then informs and strong arms, like, you know, the commercial world into behaving itself. So you need a free and open source hardware wallet scene. You need a free and open source like node making scene where we all make our own shit, and IoT making scene as well, because it just like forces the commercial interests to behave themselves a little bit more.
It shows a potential demand, a potential market, and they love the modding. They love just the different variety of devices, and the again, then future, the different variety of devices they can sell. So my story of the week is I've just been having a great time this week doing kind of political commentaries. It's a very important period in the United States, the election of 2020. A lot of people on both sides are very excited. We had the Republican National Convention last week. We talked about that. We also had some very unfortunate events in the United States, but we're trying to avoid that today. But it's been great that everyone lets me talk about politics and lets us explore these ideas in an open environment where we can all learn something. And maybe if you hear ideas that you disagree with, you can, expand and think about them some more and maybe come to a new understanding or include those ideas. And then again, we can always come back to things that we agree on, like Bitcoin and like the value of a discussion like this show. So thanks to everybody for joining us on those shows and for supporting us in the comments and with all the likes and the shares. It's been great. Also, check out the World Crypto Network store at worldcryptonetwork.store. You can get the Treasures Don't Float t-shirt, the Bitcoin Not Bombs Bitcoin Halvening 2020 Special Edition, World Crypto Network the shirt, and World Crypto Network the mug. We're going to look into offering some more products soon, but thanks again to everybody who's purchased these t-shirts and mugs. It really helps support the show and keeps us doing what we're doing. So thanks so much for joining us. Thanks, Ben, for being our guest. I think we're running out of time here. I'm going to find the right button to push. There are so many. But be sure to give us a thumbs up and a share. Subscribe down below if you already haven't. But until next time, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.